Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. Let's talk boxing. We're going to dive head first back into the controversy surrounding Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois. We're not actually going to talk about the low blow again because, quite frankly, I couldn't possibly cover it in a more comprehensive manner than I did in the post-fight video that I put up. For those of you that have yet to watch it, I implore you, please go and watch it so you can understand exactly why it is that I feel that the referee made the correct decision. For those of you that have watched it, almost 13,000 views in less than a 24-hour period. I'm so grateful to you guys. We've received some wonderful comments as well, and a couple of hundred new subscribers over the course of the last week or two. I hope I can continue to put out content that you guys enjoy. In terms of this particular video, I want to focus on two things. Number one, there's a general misconception about what constitutes a low blow. People are arguing about what is low and what isn't, and people are making errors in how they're judging it, both those that are defending Usyk and those that are defending Daniel Dubois. So we need to establish the set of rules here. The other thing I also want to talk about is the possibility of the weaponization of rule enforcement. Whilst I don't think that took place here, because I do think the right decision was made, I can understand why Daniel Dubois is very frustrated at the moment, because what you're often seeing is rules being enforced in some fights and not in others. Let's use football as an analogy. When it comes to a corner kick, for instance, you'll often see strikers and defenders jostling for position. Little shirt tugs, little grabs, they'll put their arms out wide to try and block off a run and stuff like that. The vast majority of times, it's not penalized. If, for instance, this was to occur 6, 7, 8 times in a game, and on one instance the referee decides to give a penalty, the team that give away the penalty, the defender that was holding the striker, he can't really complain because he did indeed commit a foul. But because this also happened in other matches and down the other end of the pitch earlier on in the game, he's going to feel aggrieved. And that's the sort of thing that's taken place here. Daniel Dubois did land low, and we'll look once more about what constitutes a low blow. However, because other fighters are able to get away with it, and not only are they getting away with it, unless it occurs in a really major high profile fight, quite often you're not seeing any boxing media call it out. You're not seeing anybody from commentary teams point it out. And a cynic could argue that there's a vested interest in not doing that. If an A side is getting away with something and it's in your best interest for him to get away with something, you're not going to mention it. Whereas you might very well mention the B side doing things to him. And this is where you start to have that unlevel playing field. And those little advantages can really help determine the outcome of a fight. And that's why we need to start seeing consistency, because these little advantages can be used. Now, first and foremost, let's get into the misconception of what a low blow is. There have been some really funny memes surrounding Alexander Usyk, his shorts dragged all the way up to his solar plexus like the man's Simon Cowell. But also people talking about Alexander Usyk's nuts are by his belly button, are they? Are they just below the navel? This is a misconception. You do not actually have to land in the balls for it to constitute a low blow. You can land in the bladder area, the pubic bone area. That is also a low blow. However, there's also a misconception from those that have been defending Alexander Usyk and saying that anything below the navel is a low blow. That's also incorrect. The telecast made reference to the navel yesterday, and I think that swayed a lot of people. Whilst a referee will often use the navel as a marker, that's not what the actual rules state, and that's not typically what has to be done. If you look at the British Board of Boxing Control's rules and regulations, for instance, you'll see that the belt is defined as an imaginary line across the body from the top of the hip bones, not from the navel. That's what, 3 inches? This is reinforced by the National Rulebook of USA Boxing, but they also do mention the navel. This is where the idea, I think, comes from for a lot of people. The belt line is an imaginary line from the navel to the top of the hips, and as a result, the trunks must not cover the navel. England's boxing rulebook also describes it in the same way. The belt line can be described as a line from the navel to the top of the hips and must not cover the navel. So the reason the low blow is not on the belt, but rather below it, is because, as England rulebook shows here, hitting below the belt is what constitutes a foul. So when you go below the top of the hips. In addition to that, if you go to K further down, you'll also see that ducking below the belt of the opponent is also against the rules. And we're going to talk about that later. I've highlighted that for a reason. But first, going back to this question of bodywork, Top Rank put out a tweet yesterday after Jared Anderson's fight against Andre Rudenko, and they are celebrating the quote-unquote vicious bodywork of Jared Anderson. Well, before we get into that, let's first listen to what the referee had to say to both fighters in the ring just before the fight begun.
Is the foul line, that is the foul line. Any blows on the belt or fouls?
He points to the top of each fighter's belt. He says, this is the foul line, this is the foul line. Any blows on the belt are fouls. He makes that very clear, because there was all this talk about, you know, what were they told at the rules meeting and stuff like that, because Frank Warren has actually said that they were talking about it being below the hips, midway up the hip bone, that constituted a low blow. Anything below midway up the hip bone. Well, as I've shown you, it's actually from the top of the hip bone. If Frank Warren and Daniel Dubois were given incorrect information, you would expect the referee to at least adhere to that, because what the referee gives them as a guideline, as a marker, is what you expect to be enforced during the fight. In this particular case, the referee felt that the shorts were in line, I guess, with the navel, so he felt anything on the belt line was indeed low. The referee has given these instructions here to Jared Anderson and Andre Rudenko. Now, when you actually see the tweet of what Top Rank have put out praising them, look at how many of the shots that I'm showing you here land on the belt or below the belt or partially on the belt and partially to the body. It's in double figures. And so this is being celebrated. Why isn't that a low blow? Why aren't they a series of low blows? Now, when it comes to ducking below the belt of an opponent, we spoke about that as being illegal too. Devin Haney is notorious for doing this. When Kambosos is trying to throw hooks at Devin Haney and his head is going below the belt line of Kambosos, what can Kambosos possibly do here apart from punch downwards? If he punches downwards, he's going to catch him on the back of the head and then he's going to be penalized for it. That's something we do see occur consistently. I mean, take a look at this particular example here in round 3 of their first fight. There's Kambosos' belt line, and Devin Haney's head is closer to the knee of Kambosos than it is to the belt line. The referee should be calling out Devin Haney here, and if he continues, he should be giving him a warning and taking a point away, because it is the equivalent of turning your back during the fight. But again, you do not see these things being enforced. And this is where you can start to give a window of opportunity, if you want to. For argument's sake, let's say there's an agenda at play. You can give a window of opportunity for an A side to get away with certain things. And this is what needs to be stamped out. We need consistency in boxing. Unfortunately, these things only ever get spoken about when they're involved in a massive title fight. We saw Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev in their second fight have an awful lot of controversy surrounding it because it was such a big fight. Same applies to Usyk and Dubois, a unified heavyweight championship. So it's going to cause a furore. But when Jared Anderson and Rudenko's occurring and the commentary team are not talking about it, the network and the promotional company are willing to put out tweets celebrating the vicious bodywork, when quite clearly within that tweet you've put up there were double figures as to how many low blows landed. How are you setting a precedent to have these things enforced? And often what will happen, even when there is a furore in a big fight, the fire of controversy, so to speak, is often dampened by those that might have affiliations, whether it's a friend of a victorious fighter, whether it's a pundit, whether it's boxing media that want access, or somebody that's tied to a network. For instance, when we saw this Ward Kovalev second fight and there were some consistent low blows in there, one of the excuses that was being pushed around for it not being the biggest of deals was that Andre Ward had been winning anyway. He'd hurt Kovalev prior to any of the low blows. Well, so what? I mean, to use the football match again as an analogy, imagine you've got Man United playing Liverpool and Man United are winning 1-0 and they're dominating possession. They're well on top. It doesn't just mean you're going to go and give Man United a penalty to make it 2-0, and it doesn't really matter if it wasn't a penalty. Well, you know, they were winning anyway and they were dominating possession anyway. That's not how an organised sport works. There could be an equaliser. Kovalev might have landed something big and turned the course of the tide. Maybe Andre Ward would have gone on to stop him anyway. This is not trying to take away from Ward or take away from anybody. We're talking about how you have an organised sport that's run properly. And to get that, you also need the fans and the boxing media to be saying, even if somebody's an A side, I have to call out when I'd see something that's unfair. None of us really gave Rudenko any chance of beating Jared Anderson last night, but that's not relevant. The referee has to tell Jared, listen, I told you what the rules would be. Stop this or I'm going to take a point. Otherwise, what is the point in watching boxing? Not only does Rutengo barely have a chance of winning, you're then going to put him at an additional disadvantage? What is the point of watching? So let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Are we seeing a weaponization? Is this being done on purpose in order to give certain fighters advantages? Whilst I don't think that occurred with Alexander Usyk because it was within the rules, there are many people out there that were saying if this was the other way around, do you honestly think Alexander Usyk would have been pulled up for it? I can't possibly answer that. I don't know. But what I can say is whilst the referee got the decision correct between Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois, I can understand why Dubois would potentially be frustrated because we're not always seeing a level of consistency, which could make Dubois feel as though he's been unfairly penalised. And in terms of controversy, by the way, just to show you guys that I'm completely fair, Kevin Lorena, in his last fight against Dubois, he could have an issue too. Because with him, it seemed as though he might have been stopped somewhat prematurely. And in the first round, when he had Daniel Dubois hurt, if the clock on the TV channel was accurate, that round was finished early. So this is not about me taking sides here. I'm simply trying to explain that the lack of consistency can cause problems in the sport of boxing. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Is this just inconsistency due to incompetence, or are we seeing something more sinister with an enforcement of laws in a weaponized way? And I'm not talking about Usyk specifically, but in general in the sport of boxing. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless.